The phone is face down on the table, and still, some part of you keeps checking it as if the screen could change by itself. It does not. The room is quiet, but your body is not. Your chest is tight in that specific way it gets when you are trying to act calm, while something inside you is still standing at the door, listening for footsteps that may never come. You know this feeling. Not the dramatic version people like to talk about. Not the kind with tears on the floor and a loud goodbye. This is the quieter pain. The one that sits under your ribs and makes ordinary things feel slightly unreal. You make tea, you answer messages, you go through the day, and yet there is a private part of you that keeps returning to the same place. The last conversation, the last look, the last message that never came. And maybe the hardest part is this. You are not only grieving the person, you are grieving the version of yourself that kept hoping they would finally become clear, honest, steady, or brave enough to meet you properly. You are grieving the time you spent translating silence into meaning, waiting for one more sign, one more explanation, one more reason to stay. But here is the deeper truth that most people miss. Walking away without drama is not the same as not caring. It is not coldness. It is not punishment. It is not a performance of strength. Sometimes, it is the first honest act a woman makes after months or years of abandoning herself in small, invisible ways. There is a kind of dignity that does not announce itself. It does not slam doors. It does not leave long speeches in the hallway. It does not try to win the final argument. It simply notices, very quietly, that the relationship has become a place where your nervous system lives on alert, where your heart keeps volunteering for confusion, and where your presence has started to cost more than it gives back. That moment is not always clean. It is often messy inside. You may still love them. You may still miss them. You may still wonder whether you are giving up too soon, whether you are being too proud, whether you should send one more message just to make sure you did everything you could. And if you have a tender heart, you may even feel guilty for wanting peace more than you want the person. That guilt can be deceptive. It can make you believe that staying available is kindness, when sometimes it is just habit. It can make you believe that explaining yourself one more time is maturity, when sometimes it is only a way of postponing the truth. It can make you believe that being easy to reach is the same as being loving. But love without dignity slowly turns into self-betrayal. And this is where Carl Jung becomes important, because he understood something that modern people often miss. We do not only suffer from what happens to us, we suffer from the inner structure that makes us stay too long, hope too hard, and confuse our own longing with destiny. Jung would have called attention to the invisible forces underneath the scene, the persona, the shadow, the projection, the complex. Those are not just abstract terms. They are living patterns in the way you attach, wait, justify, and finally leave. The persona is the face you learn to wear in order to be accepted. Maybe you became the understanding one, the patient one, the one who does not ask for too much, the one who can handle mixed signals, the one who says, "It's fine," when it is not fine at all, the one who makes space, gives grace, and keeps the peace. On the outside, that persona looks graceful. On the inside, it can become a cage. Because if your whole identity is built around being the woman who never makes things difficult, then your own pain becomes inconvenient even to you. And that is how many women lose themselves in a relationship without ever having a dramatic collapse. They do it politely. They do it with good intentions. They do it while telling themselves that love requires patience. But patience is not the same as self-erasure, and silence is not always wisdom. Sometimes silence is the body's way of saying, "I can no longer keep pretending this is enough." You may have noticed that the moment you stop chasing, the emotional atmosphere changes. Not always because the other person suddenly becomes noble or enlightened. More often because the old dynamic depended on your movement, your reaching, your checking, your softening, your willingness to carry the emotional weight for two people. When you stop, the room changes. And that can feel strange, because part of you may have believed that if you loved well enough, stayed calm enough, or explained clearly enough, the situation would eventually settle into safety. But the deeper pattern was never only about them. It was also about the part of you that kept hoping consistency would appear if you just became more accommodating. This is where projection enters the story. Sometimes we do not fall in love with the person in front of us. We fall in love with the possibility we placed over them. We project onto them our longing for certainty, our hunger for reassurance, our image of the one who will finally see us without us having to perform. We ask the other person to carry a meaning they were never built to carry, and when they cannot, we keep trying to force the image to fit the reality. That is painful to admit, because it does not make you foolish, it makes you human. The unconscious does this constantly. It takes a small spark and turns it into fate. It takes a gesture and turns it into promise. It takes a little warmth and turns it into a future. And if there is an old abandonment complex underneath it all, the stakes feel even higher. The body does not just hear, "he is distant." It hears, "you are about to be left." So you keep reaching, not because you are weak, because some part of you is trying to prevent an old wound from reopening. But every time you chase what is already drifting away, you teach your nervous system that love must be earned through tension. You teach your heart that calm is dangerous, because calm might mean loss. You teach yourself that being chosen is more important than choosing yourself, and that is the real cost. The quiet dignity of walking away is not about proving you do not care. It is about no longer organizing your life around the fear of not being enough for someone who is not meeting you. It is about refusing to keep auditioning for a role you already outgrew. There is often a moment before the decision, a small, almost invisible moment. You are sitting in your car after seeing a message that is too vague to trust. Or you are standing in your kitchen, staring at the sink, and suddenly you realize you are tired in a way sleep will not fix. Or you are lying in bed with your phone in your hand, and the silence on the screen feels louder than any argument ever did. That is not just emotional exhaustion. That is the psyche beginning to withdraw its investment. Jung would have said that when a pattern has gone on long enough, the unconscious starts compensating. It pushes you toward the truth your conscious mind keeps trying to soften. You may call it intuition. You may call it burnout. You may call it finally being done. But underneath, something deeper is happening. The self, in Jungian language, is the organizing center that pulls you toward wholeness. And wholeness does not always arrive as peace at first. Sometimes it arrives as discomfort with your own compromises. You begin to see that being understanding has become a role you hide inside. That being low maintenance has become a way to avoid conflict, even when conflict would have been healthier than silence. That being the bigger person has sometimes meant being the smaller version of yourself for too long. And once you see that, you cannot unsee it. This is the part most people avoid, because it is easier to blame the other person entirely. It is easier to say, they were emotionally unavailable, full stop. Sometimes that is true, but the deeper question is what in you was drawn to the unavailable? What in you mistook uncertainty for depth? And what in you believed that if you could just be calm enough, you could turn ambiguity into commitment? That question is not meant to shame you. It is meant to free you. Because if you only see the other person as the problem, you remain trapped in their behavior. But if you see the pattern, you begin to recover your power. Not the power to control them, the power to stop participating. And that shift is quieter than people expect. It does not always feel like triumph. Sometimes it feels like grief. Sometimes it feels like standing in a room after a long storm and realizing how much of yourself was scattered across the floor. Sometimes it feels like your body does not trust the new boundary yet. You may wake up and want to text. You may hear a song and feel the old pull. You may even miss them more once you stop chasing, because the chasing kept the fantasy alive. That is normal. The psyche often resists the loss of an attachment, even when the attachment is hurting you. A complex does not release its grip because you understand it once. It loosens when you stop feeding it with repetition. And repetition can be subtle: checking, rereading, imagining, explaining, waiting, rehearsing the conversation in your head. Every one of those acts keeps the emotional loop alive. Walking away without drama means interrupting the loop. It means refusing to keep your body in a state of suspended hope for someone who has shown you that clarity is not their priority. It means letting your silence mean something different, not a tactic, not a test, not a baited pause designed to trigger them, just a return to yourself. There is a huge difference. A tactic still belongs to the old game. A return to yourself ends the game. And maybe that is why it feels so hard at first. Because if you have spent a long time being the one who repairs, explains, softens, and waits, then dignity can feel almost unnatural. You may even misread it as indifference. You may think, if I really loved them, wouldn't I keep trying? But love that asks you to disappear is not love that can hold you. It may be attachment, it may be hope, it may be habit, it may be projection, but it is not a place where your soul can breathe. The soul does not flourish in constant self-doubt. And here is another layer. Sometimes what you are really walking away from is not only the person, but the persona you had to wear around them. The woman who never asks directly, the woman who laughs off disappointment, the woman who stays available because she is afraid that boundaries will make her look difficult, the woman who confuses being chosen with being worthy. That persona may have protected you once. Maybe it helped you survive a home where your needs were too much. Maybe it helped you get love by being easy. Maybe it helped you avoid rejection. But what protected you in one season can imprison you in another. Jung knew this well. A persona that once helped you adapt can become a mask you forget you are wearing. And when that happens, the mask begins to live your life for you. You do not want to be the woman who is only lovable when she is convenient. You do not want to be the woman who can be reached only when she asks for nothing. You do not want to be the woman who has to shrink her truth so that someone else's comfort remains intact. That is not maturity. That is a slow erosion of self-respect. And self-respect is not loud. It does not need to announce itself with a speech. Sometimes it sounds like a simple sentence inside you. No, this no longer works for me. Sometimes it sounds like the decision not to send the message you have already sent 3 times before. Sometimes it sounds like closing the phone and letting the unanswered text remain unanswered. Sometimes it sounds like leaving the table before the conversation becomes another round of confusion dressed up as closeness. That is the quiet dignity. Not dramatic, not bitter, not cold, just clear. And clarity, once it arrives, can feel almost sacred, because it ends the internal negotiation. The part of you that kept saying, maybe if I wait a little longer, starts to weaken. The part of you that kept making excuses starts to go quiet. The body begins to understand that peace is not something you receive from another person. Peace is something you protect. If this names something you have never been able to say out loud, write a single sentence for yourself. I am no longer available for relationships that require me to abandon myself. That sentence is not a spell, it is a boundary. And boundaries, in Jungian terms, are not walls against life. They are the edges that allow the self to take shape. Without edges, everything leaks. Attention leaks, energy leaks, dignity leaks. You become porous to every mood, every delay, every half-truth. But when a boundary is new, guilt often comes with it. That guilt can be intense. You may feel selfish, you may feel mean, you may feel like you are becoming someone you do not recognize. This is where many women turn back too soon. They mistake guilt for evidence. They think, if I feel bad, I must be doing something wrong. But guilt is not always a moral compass. Sometimes it is just the sensation of leaving an old role. If you were trained to be available, then unavailability will feel wrong at first. If you were trained to explain yourself endlessly, then silence will feel suspicious at first. If you were trained to keep the peace at your own expense, then choosing yourself will feel almost rebellious at first. That does not mean the boundary is wrong. It means the old identity is protesting. And here is where the shadow comes in. The shadow is not only the dark side of the other person, it is also the part of you that you have not wanted to admit exists. The part that is tired of being nice, the part that is angry, the part that resents being taken for granted, the part that wants to say, I am not here to be convenient. When women suppress that shadow for too long, it does not disappear. It returns as exhaustion, numbness, resentment, or sudden coldness. So, if you have started to feel colder, do not rush to judge yourself. Sometimes what people call coldness is simply the nervous system finally refusing to keep bleeding warmth into a place that has not been safe. It is not cruelty. It is the body protecting what the heart kept giving away too freely. There is a difference between becoming hard and becoming whole. Hardness closes. Wholeness discriminates. It knows where to open and where to stop. That is why walking away without drama is so powerful. It is not a performance of superiority. It is an act of discrimination. You are no longer mixing your tenderness with people who treat it as a resource. You are no longer handing your depth to someone who only knows how to skim the surface. You are no longer making your availability the proof of your love. And the more you do this, the more the old emotional fog begins to lift. You may notice that the person who once occupied so much mental space starts to take up less room. Not because you forced yourself to forget them, but because you stopped feeding the image. You stopped idealizing. You stopped rehearsing. You stopped turning every small sign into a story. You started seeing what was actually there instead of what you hoped might be there one day. That is a painful kind of honesty. But it is also freedom, because the truth does not always comfort you at first. Sometimes it humiliates the fantasy. Sometimes it says, this was never as mutual as you needed it to be. Sometimes it says, you were loving a possibility. Sometimes it says, you were waiting for a person to become the answer to a question only you could answer. And once that lands, you begin to understand why the relationship felt so heavy. You were carrying both your feelings and the meaning you hoped they would provide. That is too much for one heart. And no, this does not mean the other person felt nothing. It does not mean they were empty. It does not mean they were pretending every moment. Human beings are rarely that simple. There may have been genuine feeling, real attraction, real confusion, real fear. But feeling is not the same as capacity. Attraction is not the same as readiness. Intensity is not the same as devotion. The psyche can become addicted to intensity because intensity feels like life. But life is not the same as volatility. In fact, many people mistake instability for passion because they have never learned how to feel safe in steady love. Jung would have recognized this as a problem of the complex, where old emotional patterns distort present reality. The complex does not ask, is this good for me? It asks, does this resemble what I already know? And if what you know is chasing, uncertainty, and emotional hunger, then calm can feel boring while inconsistency feels magnetic. That is one of the most heartbreaking truths in relationships. Sometimes the very thing your soul needs is the thing your old wound does not recognize as love. So when you walk away without drama, you are not only leaving a person, you are leaving a pattern that has been speaking through your longing. You are interrupting the old script where love meant proving, waiting, and hoping to be chosen by someone who never fully stepped into the role you imagined for them. And yes, there is sorrow in that. Real sorrow. Not the shallow kind that can be solved by a quote or a weekend away. The kind that sits in the body like a weight. The kind that makes you stare out of windows at night and wonder how something that felt so meaningful could also feel so disappointing. The kind that leaves you feeling embarrassed by how much you cared. Do not be embarrassed. Caring deeply is not the problem. Giving that care without a center is the problem. Loving deeply is not the problem. Loving without boundaries is the problem. Wanting closeness is not the problem. Confusing closeness with self-erasure is the problem. You are allowed to want love that does not require you to disappear. You are allowed to want a man who does not make you guess your place. You are allowed to want a connection where effort is not one-sided, where clarity is not a luxury, where your nervous system does not have to interpret every delay like a weather report. And if that means leaving quietly, then leave quietly. The quiet way is often the strongest way, because drama still keeps you tied to the other person's reaction. Quiet dignity breaks the thread. It says, I do not need your collapse to validate my leaving. It says, I do not need to be seen as the villain in order to protect myself. It says, I can be sad and still be clear. That is real maturity. Not the kind that performs detachment, but the kind that can feel grief without reopening the door to confusion. Not the kind that pretends nothing mattered, but the kind that understands not everything meaningful is meant to continue. There is a moment, usually after the first real boundary, when you feel the shape of your own life returning. It may be small. You notice you are sleeping better. You laugh more easily with a friend. You stop checking your phone first thing in the morning. You put on music and feel your body respond again. You sit at your own table and realize the silence no longer feels like punishment. It feels like space. That space is important because the psyche needs room to reorient after a long attachment. It needs time to stop scanning for the other person's mood. It needs time to remember that your day belongs to you. And when that memory returns, something in you straightens. Not dramatically, just enough to breathe more fully. This is not the end of love. It is the end of self-abandonment. And if you are wondering whether this means you will never love again, or whether the person will come back, or whether leaving quietly changes everything, the honest answer is this: no one can promise that. Not in a healthy, truthful way. People return or they do not. Feelings change or they do not. but that is not the measure of your healing. The measure is whether you are willing to remain in a place that costs you your dignity. That is the question. Not, will they finally understand? Not, will they finally choose me? But, what am I teaching myself by staying where I am not fully met? That question can change a life. It is the moment the projection begins to dissolve, the moment the fantasy loses its grip, the moment you stop asking the relationship to give you an identity and start asking your own soul what it needs. And often, what it needs is simpler than the wounded mind expects. Rest, clarity, boundaries, truth, time away from the emotional weather of someone else. There is no shame in that. There is only a woman learning that her heart is not a public room. Not everyone gets to enter. Not every silence deserves your panic. Not every distance is yours to fix. Not every unfinished thing is yours to carry. And if you have spent years being the one who stays, the one who waits, the one who softens, the one who makes it easier for everyone else, then walking away without drama may feel like becoming a stranger to yourself at first. But it is not a stranger. It is the self you have been postponing, the self that does not beg, the self that does not chase confusion and call it chemistry, the self that can love without losing its outline, the self that can leave a half-open door behind without needing to slam it, the self that knows silence can be a punishment, but it can also be a revelation. And maybe that is the symbol to hold on to now, the door left half open, not because you are waiting by it, not because you are leaving a crack for manipulation, but because you have finally understood that a healthy life is not built by forcing your way into rooms where you are not fully welcomed. Sometimes the most dignified thing you can do is step back, close the phone, and let the door remain what it is, a door, not a prison, not a test, just a door. If you have reached the point where your body feels calmer when you imagine letting go than when you imagine staying, pay attention to that. The body often knows before the mind is ready. It knows when a connection has become too expensive. It knows when your soul is asking for a different kind of peace. It knows when the cost of hope has become too high. Trust that knowing, not blindly, not romantically, but honestly. You do not have to make a scene to make a decision. You do not have to explain yourself into exhaustion. You do not have to keep proving that your leaving was justified. Sometimes the most dignified ending is the one no one gets to debate, because you have already decided inside yourself. And when that happens, the old question begins to lose its power. Not, what do they feel? But, what do I feel when I stop betraying myself? That is the question that opens the next chapter. And if this is the moment you recognize yourself, then let it be enough for tonight. Let the phone stay face down. Let the room stay quiet. Let your breath go all the way down into your chest. Let the guilt pass through without obeying it. Let the old story loosen its grip. You are not becoming cold. You are becoming clear. You are not punishing anyone. You are protecting your center. You are not losing love. You are losing the habit of calling confusion love. And that is why the quiet way out matters so much. Because it returns you to a life where your heart does not have to stand in the doorway forever. A life where your dignity is not negotiated. A life where the silence is no longer a wound waiting for a reply, but a space in which you can finally hear yourself again. My silence is not a game. It is my return to myself. And when you are ready, that return will feel less like leaving someone behind and more like coming home to the part of you that never should have been left waiting in the first place.